remember checking my phone while waiting at the red light. It was Tuesday, May 17th, my mother's 62nd birthday. We were less than 2 miles from her house, my son Ethan excitedly holding the gift box in the back seat. Inside was a handmade photo album he'd spent weeks creating, filled with pictures of us together and little notes he'd written in his careful 8-year-old handwriting. "Do you think Grandma will cry happy tears?" Ethan asked, fidgeting with the silver bow we'd picked out together. I smiled into the rearview mirror. "I think she might," I said, though something in my stomach tightened as I spoke. The notification light blinked on my phone. I shouldn't have looked. I should have just driven those final 2 miles in blissful ignorance. But I did look, and there it was, a text from my mother. "Let's pretend you never existed. It'll be easier that way." 7 words. Just 7 simple words that somehow managed to collapse 29 years of life into rubble. My hands froze on the steering wheel as I read them again, hoping somehow I'd misunderstood. The light turned green. Someone honked behind me. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mom? Are we still going to Grandma's?" Ethan's voice sounded distant, underwater. I couldn't answer him. I couldn't even look back at him. All I could do was stare at those words glowing on my screen. 2:17 p.m. That's what the timestamp said. 2:17 in the afternoon on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, and my mother had decided I should no longer exist. It wasn't entirely unexpected. Things between us had been strained for years. When I married Daniel, she made no secret of her disapproval. He wasn't educated enough, ambitious enough, or from the right sort of family. When we struggled financially after Ethan was born, she offered help with strings attached. Strings that would have tied us to her control forever. I said no, and the frost between us deepened. After Daniel left 3 years ago, I thought she might soften. Instead, she seemed almost satisfied, as if his departure validated all her earlier criticisms. "I told you so," hung unspoken between us during the rare occasions we spoke. Still, we maintained a facade of family. She saw Ethan occasionally, sent birthday cards, made appearances at school events. It was a cold, distant version of grandmother and mother, but it was something. Something I clung to, perhaps more for Ethan's sake than my own. Now this. A text message erasing me, erasing us, on her birthday of all days. "Mom?" Ethan's voice cracked a little. "Are you crying?" I quickly wiped my face, unaware until that moment that tears had been streaming down my cheeks. I took a deep breath and turned to face my son. "Sweetheart," I began, having no idea what would follow. His small face was bright with anticipation, those hazel eyes, so like my father's, wide and trusting. The gift box sat on his lap, wrapped in shimmering silver paper that he'd insisted on because grandmas like sparkly things. "Is something wrong with Grandma?" he asked, clutching the box tighter. "No, baby," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "But I don't think we can visit Grandma today after all." His face fell. "But it's her birthday, and I made her present." He lifted the box slightly, as if I needed reminding. "I know you did, and it's beautiful. But sometimes," I struggled for words that wouldn't crush him. "Sometimes grown-ups need space. Grandma needs some space today." "We could just drop off the present," he suggested, ever the problem solver. "We don't have to stay long." The hopefulness in his voice nearly broke me. How do you explain to a child that his grandmother had just effectively disowned his mother? How do you translate adult cruelty into something a child's heart can process without being damaged by it? "Let's go home," I said finally. "We can call Grandma later." It was a small lie, but I needed time to figure this out. I pulled back onto the road, driving on autopilot while my mind raced. I glanced at my phone again at the next light, half hoping she'd sent another message explaining the first. Nothing. At home, Ethan placed the gift carefully on the kitchen counter, as if it might still fulfill its purpose someday. He went to play in his room while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at those 7 words. I should have been angry. Part of me was. But mostly, I felt hollow, carved out by years of trying to be enough for someone who had decided long ago that I never would be. I thought about calling her, demanding an explanation. But what explanation could possibly make this okay? What words could justify telling your child they should cease to exist? Instead, I called Sarah, my oldest friend who had witnessed the complicated dance between my mother and me since childhood. She did what? Sarah's voice rose in disbelief when I read her the text. Told me I should never have existed, I repeated, the words no less shocking the second time. On her birthday? When you were literally driving over with Ethan and a gift? Sarah's indignation was comforting in its intensity. That's it, I'm coming over. An hour later, Sarah arrived with wine and chocolate cake. We sat on my back porch while Ethan played in the yard, occasional bursts of laughter floating back to us as he chased our aging golden retriever, Max. Have you replied to her? Sarah asked, pouring me another glass. I shook my head. What do you even say to that? How about, go to hell? That seems appropriate. I gave a weak laugh. Tempting. I'm serious, Jess. This isn't just about you anymore. What kind of person sends a message like that knowing her grandson is about to show up with a birthday gift? Who does that? I watched Ethan running in circles, arms outstretched like airplane wings, so full of joy and innocence. She's always been like this, though. Cold when she's hurt, cruel when she feels threatened. And what exactly threatened her today? Your existence? Your son's love? Sarah's eyes flashed. No. This is where it stops. This is where you draw the line. I knew she was right. For years, I'd made excuses for my mother's behavior, attributed her coldness to her own difficult upbringing, forgiven the little cruelties because that's just how she is. But with Ethan in the picture, everything changed. I couldn't let him internalize the idea that love is conditional, that people can simply decide you don't deserve to exist. What do I tell him about her? I asked, watching my son play. The truth, Sarah said softly. A version he can understand, but the truth nonetheless. Kids sense lies, Jess. They fill the gaps with things that are often worse than reality. That night, after Sarah left, I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed. He was already in pajamas, hair damp from his bath, clutching the stuffed tiger he'd had since infancy. Ethan, remember how we couldn't visit Grandma today? He nodded solemnly. Because she needs space. That's right, and I need to explain why. I took a deep breath. Grandma sent me a message today that hurt my feelings very much. She said something that wasn't kind or true. What did she say? His eyes were wide, curious. She said, I hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. She said she doesn't want to see us anymore, that she wants to pretend we're not family. Ethan's brow furrowed. But we are family. You're her daughter. Yes, I am, and that's why it hurt so much. I stroked his hair gently. Sometimes even grown-ups say things that aren't okay, and when that happens, we need to protect ourselves by keeping some distance from them. Is she still my grandma? He asked, his voice small. The question hit me like a physical blow. It was exactly what he'd asked in the car, in that moment when I'd first read the text. The simplicity of it, the innocent confusion, laid bare the cruelty of my mother's actions in a way nothing else could. I broke down. All the composure I'd maintained through the afternoon crumbled as sobs racked my body. I pulled Ethan close, burying my face in his small shoulder. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry, I whispered through tears. His little arms wrapped around my neck. Don't cry, Mom. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. None of this was okay. When I finally regained control, I looked at my son's worried face and knew I had to be stronger than this. Biologically, yes, she's still your grandma. Nothing changes that. But being a real grandmother means loving and caring and being present. And right now, she's not able to do those things. Because she's mad? I don't think it's about being mad exactly. I think Grandma has a lot of hurt inside her that makes it hard for her to love the way other people do. And that's very sad. But it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. Can we still give her the present someday? When she's not hurting anymore? The innocent optimism in his question made my chest ache. We'll see, sweetie. But for now, I think we need to give Grandma that space she needs. And we need to take care of ourselves too. He nodded thoughtfully, processing all this with the remarkable resilience children somehow possess. How about we have our own special day tomorrow? I suggested, desperate to see him smile again. We can go to the Science Museum, get ice cream, whatever you want. Can we bring Max too? The museum probably won't let dogs in, I said with a small laugh. But we can take him to the park after. Okay. He yawned, snuggling deeper under his covers. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby, more than anything in this whole world. I kissed his forehead and turned out the light, leaving his door cracked just the way he liked it. Back in the kitchen, I stared at the silver-wrapped gift still sitting on the counter. Inside was Ethan's heart, poured out in pictures and words for a grandmother who had just rejected us both with a single text message. The morning after my mother's text, I woke to find Ethan standing beside my bed, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in all directions. Mom, he whispered urgently. I had an idea. I blinked away sleep, squinting at the alarm clock. 6:23 a.m. What is it, honey? If Grandma doesn't want our present, we should give it to someone else who needs it. I sat up, touched by his solution. That's a really thoughtful idea. Who were you thinking of? Mrs. Wilson, he said confidently, referring to our elderly neighbor who lived alone. Her birthday is in June, she told me when I helped her carry in groceries. A surge of pride washed over me. Even in the face of rejection, my son's first thought was of generosity, of redirecting love elsewhere rather than withdrawing it. That's perfect, I said, pulling him in for a hug. We can add some special touches for Mrs. Wilson before we give it to her. Later that morning, as we sat at the kitchen table adapting the photo album for Mrs. Wilson, adding drawings and notes specific to her, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. My hand hovered over it, heart suddenly racing. After sending such a final, devastating message yesterday, what could she possibly have to say now? Is that Grandma? Ethan asked, looking up from his drawing. I nodded, still staring at the ringing phone. Are you going to answer it? A good question. Part of me wanted to reject her call, just as cruelly as she had rejected my existence. But another part, the part that had been seeking her approval for 29 years, wanted desperately to hear what she had to say. Yes, I said finally, picking up the phone. I'm going to answer it. I stepped onto the back porch for privacy before accepting the call. Hello? Jessica. My mother's voice was clipped, formal, as if yesterday's text had never happened. I noticed you didn't come by yesterday. The absurdity of her statement momentarily robbed me of speech. When I found my voice again, it was steady, controlled. We were on our way when I received your text, the one where you said to pretend I never existed. A brief silence. Then, you're being dramatic. Am I? Those were your exact words, Mom. It was a momentary frustration. You know how I get when I'm upset. Yes, I did know. I'd spent a lifetime walking on eggshells around her volatile emotions, making excuses for her cruelty, accepting the blame for her outbursts. "Ethan made you a beautiful gift," I said, instead of all the accusations burning in my throat. "He spent weeks on it. He was in the car when I got your text, asking if you'd cry happy tears when you opened it." Another silence, longer this time. "I didn't know he was with you. Would it have mattered?" "Of course it would have," she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "I would never want to hurt Ethan." "Just me, then?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. "Jessica, you're being ridiculous. It was one text sent in a moment of anger." "What were you angry about, Mom? What terrible thing did I do that warranted telling me I should never have existed?" "You know perfectly well," she snapped. "That post you made on Facebook about your father, making him out to be some kind of saint when you know how he treated me." I closed my eyes, suddenly understanding. Yesterday had been the anniversary of my father's death as well as her birthday, a cruel coincidence of the calendar. I had posted a simple memory, a photo of Dad and me fishing when I was 9, with the caption, "Missing you today, Dad. Ethan has your laugh." "That wasn't about you," I said quietly. "Everything about your father is about me," she retorted. 20 years of marriage, Jessica. 20 years I gave him, and he couldn't even stay faithful. But sure, post about what a wonderful father he was. The familiar refrain. My father had had an affair in the final year of their marriage. He'd moved out, filed for divorce, then died suddenly of a heart attack before it was finalized. In my mother's narrative, his infidelity retroactively poisoned every good memory, erased every kindness he'd ever shown. She couldn't forgive him, and by extension, couldn't forgive me for still loving the good parts of him that remained in my memory. "He was a wonderful father," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "He made mistakes as a husband, terrible ones. But he loved me, and he would have loved Ethan. How convenient that you only remember the good parts." "Mom," I said, exhaustion suddenly weighing on me. "Why did you call?" "To tell you to bring my grandson over today instead. I have a right to see him on my birthday." The entitlement in her voice sparked something in me. Not anger, exactly, but clarity. A crystalline understanding that this pattern would never change unless I changed it. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" "No, we won't be coming over today, or tomorrow, or next week." My voice grew stronger with each word. "You don't get to erase me one day and demand access to my child the next. He is my grandson, and he is my son," I interrupted, surprising us both. "My son, who I am raising to understand that people don't get to treat you cruelly and then act like nothing happened, that relationships require respect and apologies and change." "So dramatic," she scoffed. "One text and suddenly I'm cruel?" "It wasn't just one text, Mom. It's been a lifetime of moments like this. Withholding love when I don't meet your expectations. Punishing me for any perceived slight. Making me feel like I have to earn the right to be your daughter. That is completely untrue. It's completely true, and we both know it." I took a deep breath. "I'm setting a boundary, Mom. I won't expose Ethan to this dynamic anymore. When you're ready to acknowledge how your words and actions affect others, when you're ready to apologize and commit to changing this pattern, we can talk about rebuilding our relationship. But until then, we need space. You're keeping my grandson from me? Over a text message?" Her voice rose incredulously. "I'm protecting my son from watching his mother be devalued and discarded. I'm teaching him that love shouldn't hurt. That's my job as his parent." Through the kitchen window, I could see Ethan still working diligently on his drawings for Mrs. Wilson, his tongue poking out in concentration. The sight strengthened my resolve. "Jessica, you're being completely unreasonable." Goodbye, Mom. Take care of yourself. I ended the call before she could respond, my hand shaking slightly but my mind surprisingly calm. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had spoken my truth to my mother without backing down, without accepting the blame, without prioritizing her feelings over my own well-being. I stood on the porch for several minutes, just breathing, letting the significance of what had just happened settle into my bones. It wasn't just about one cruel text or one boundary set. It was about recognizing, finally, that I deserved better, that Ethan deserved better, that we both deserved relationships built on consistent love, not conditional approval. When I went back inside, Ethan looked up from his artwork. Was Grandma mad? I sat down beside him, choosing my words carefully. Grandma was upset, yes. She wanted us to come over today instead. Are we going to? He seemed more curious than eager, watching my face closely. No, sweetheart. Remember what we talked about last night? About giving ourselves some space from people who hurt our feelings? He nodded solemnly. Even if they're family. That's right. I told Grandma we need some time apart until she can be kinder with her words and actions. Did she say sorry for the mean text? No, I admitted. She didn't. Ethan considered this, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Mrs. Garcia says that sorry is the superglue of friendships. It doesn't fix everything, but it holds things together until they get stronger again. Mrs. Garcia, his second-grade teacher, apparently dispensed wisdom along with arithmetic. That's a really good way of putting it, I said, impressed. So Grandma needs superglue, he concluded simply, returning to his drawing. I smiled at his straightforward assessment. Yes, I suppose she does. We spent the rest of the morning working on Mrs. Wilson's gift. By lunchtime, we had transformed the photo album into something new, still containing some family photos, but now interspersed with colorful drawings of flowers, Mrs. Wilson's passion, notes about her kindness to us, and even a few pictures of her beloved cat that Ethan had taken when pet-sitting. As promised, we went to the Science Museum that afternoon. Watching Ethan's excitement as he explored the exhibits, I realized something important. Joy doesn't disappear when you set boundaries. If anything, it expands, freed from the constant tension of walking on eggshells, from the exhaustion of trying to earn love that should be freely given. My phone buzzed several times throughout the day, my mother calling again and again. I didn't answer. This boundary needed to hold if anything was ever going to change between us. That evening, we delivered the repurposed gift to Mrs. Wilson. The elderly woman's face lit up with genuine surprise and delight as Ethan proudly presented it to her. I made it special for you, he explained as she paged through it, tears welling in her faded blue eyes. This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received, she said, pulling Ethan in for a gentle hug. And it's not even my birthday yet. We wanted to practice giving it, Ethan said innocently, to make sure we did it right. Mrs. Wilson looked at me over his head, a question in her eyes. I gave a small smile and slight shake of my head. She seemed to understand immediately, squeezing my hand when Ethan wasn't looking. Later, as I tucked Ethan into bed, he asked the question I'd been dreading all day. Is Grandma sad that we didn't come over? I sat on the edge of his bed, considering how to answer truthfully without burdening him. I think she's more angry than sad right now. Sometimes when grown-ups don't get what they want, they get angry instead of thinking about why things happened the way they did. Like when Jake pushed Mia at recess because she wouldn't give him the ball, he offered, making connections in his remarkable little mind. Yes, something like that. Grandma needs to learn that she can't push people away and then demand they come right back without saying sorry. Will she ever learn? The hopefulness in his voice squeezed my heart. I don't know, sweetie. Some people find it very hard to change, especially as they get older. But we can hope. He nodded, yawning widely. I hope she does. But Mrs. Wilson liked our present a lot, didn't she? She absolutely loved it, I assured him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. You brought her so much joy today. That's what presents are supposed to do, he murmured sleepily, his eyes drifting closed. Make people happy. I sat with him until his breathing deepened into sleep, marveling at his wisdom and resilience. In trying to protect him from my mother's conditional love, I had somehow raised a child who understood unconditional love better than most adults. Back in the living room, I finally looked at my phone. 5 missed calls from my mother, and a text message that simply read, "This is ridiculous. Call me immediately." No apology, no acknowledgement, just another demand. I put the phone down without responding and picked up the book I'd been trying to finish for months. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight, at least, the boundary held. And in that space, the space between what was and what might be, I found a moment of peace I hadn't known was possible. 3 weeks passed since I'd set the boundary with my mother. 3 weeks of missed calls, increasingly demanding text messages, and eventually, silence. The final message I received simply read, "When you're done with this childish tantrum, let me know." I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on Ethan and on rebuilding the parts of myself that had been eroded by years of trying to earn my mother's approval. It was strange how quickly some things changed and how deeply ingrained other habits remained. I'd catch myself composing mental updates to share with her before remembering we weren't speaking. I'd see something in a store window and think, "Mom would like that," before the reality crashed back. "Is it normal to miss someone who hurt you?" I asked Dr. Levine during my second therapy session. After years of avoiding it, I'd finally made the call the day after my mother's birthday. "Absolutely," she assured me, her kind eyes crinkling behind tortoiseshell glasses. Relationships, especially parent-child ones, are rarely all good or all bad. We can miss the good parts while still recognizing that the relationship as a whole was harmful. I keep waiting to stop feeling guilty, I admitted. Guilt often comes from unmet expectations, either our own or others. Your mother expected unconditional access to you and Ethan, regardless of how she treated you. When you changed that dynamic, her disappointment got reframed as your failure. That's exactly how it feels, I said, relieved at being understood. The question is, Doctor, Levine continued, whose expectations do you want to prioritize now? Hers, or your own standards for how you deserve to be treated? It was a revelatory moment for me. For 29 years, I'd been living according to my mother's expectations, measuring my worth through her ever-shifting approval. What would it look like to live by my own standards instead? I began to explore that question in small ways. I cut my hair shorter than my mother had ever allowed, something I'd wanted to do for years. I signed up for pottery classes, ignoring her voice in my head saying it was a waste of time and money. I reconnected with friends she'd never approved of. Ethan noticed the changes in me. "You laugh more now," he observed one evening as we made homemade pizza together, flour dusting both our noses. "Do I?" I smiled, surprising myself with how natural it felt. "Yep, and you dance in the kitchen. You never used to do that." I hadn't realized he'd noticed. "I guess I'm feeling a bit more free." He nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense. "Because of the superglue thing with Grandma?" "Sort of," I said, searching for words he could understand. "Sometimes when we stop trying so hard to make other people happy, we discover what makes us happy instead, like putting pineapple on pizza," he suggested with a mischievous grin, knowing it was a controversial topping choice in our household. I laughed. Exactly like putting pineapple on pizza. Life settled into a new rhythm. Work at the graphic design firm picked up, and I was assigned a major campaign that challenged my creative skills. Ethan finished second grade with excellent marks and started summer day camp, coming home each afternoon, sun-kissed and full of stories about hiking trails and frog-catching expeditions. We spent weekends exploring, visiting local museums, trying new parks, even taking a day trip to the coast where Ethan declared the ocean bigger than the whole universe. We had dinner with Sarah and her family regularly. Mrs. Wilson taught Ethan how to plant tomatoes in her garden, and he checked on them faithfully every other day, amazed at how quickly they grew under his care. Life wasn't perfect. I still struggled financially as a single mother. Ethan still missed his father, who had moved to California and rarely called. There were still moments when I doubted my decision to distance myself from my mother, especially when Ethan would occasionally ask about her. But beneath the normal challenges of daily life, something fundamental had shifted. I was learning to trust myself, to value my own perceptions, to believe that my feelings mattered. And perhaps most importantly, I was showing Ethan what healthy boundaries looked like, that love shouldn't come at the cost of your dignity. It was on a rainy Tuesday in July when the certified letter arrived. I recognized my mother's handwriting on the envelope immediately, and my stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a formal notice from her attorney, stating that she was amending her will to remove me as beneficiary and requesting information about setting up a trust for Ethan that would bypass my control. The letter closed with a warning that if I continued to alienate her from her grandson, she would pursue grandparents' rights through legal channels. My hands trembled as I read it a second time. The calculated coldness of it, the way she weaponized her financial resources, the threat thinly veiled as concern for Ethan. It was classic emotional manipulation, but now with legal muscle behind it. I called Sarah in a panic. "She's threatening to sue for grandparent visitation rights," I blurted when she answered. "She's what?" "Jessica, she can't do that. There's no way any court would..." "She has money for expensive lawyers." "I don't." My voice cracked. "And she's cutting me out of her will." "Which you never counted on anyway," Sarah pointed out practically. "Look, I know this is scary, but this is just another control tactic. She's escalating because your boundary is working." "It doesn't feel like it's working," I said, staring at the letter. "It feels like I've made everything worse." "You haven't," Sarah insisted. "You're just experiencing the extinction burst." "The what?" "Extinction burst. My therapist explained it to me when I was setting boundaries with my dad. When someone's used to controlling you and suddenly can't, they often escalate dramatically before they accept the new reality. It's like a toddler having a bigger tantrum right before they give up and comply." The analogy was so accurate it startled a laugh from me despite my anxiety. "So this legal threat is basically my mother throwing herself on the floor of the grocery store because I won't buy her candy." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "The question is, are you going to give in to the tantrum?" After we hung up, I reread the letter more carefully. Behind the legal language and threats, I could see the desperation. My boundary had held for nearly a month, and she was losing her mind over it. This wasn't about love for Ethan. It was about control over me. I drafted a brief factual response, then had Sarah's husband, a contracts lawyer, review it before sending it. It simply acknowledged receipt of her letter and stated that any further communication should go through my lawyer, whom I didn't actually have yet, but she didn't need to know that. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching lightning flicker on the horizon. The storm was still distant, but I could feel it approaching in more ways than one. My phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number, but the message made the sender immediately clear. "This is your mother. Stop playing games and answer your phone. My attorney is serious about this." She'd switched to a different phone, thinking I'd blocked her number. The persistence would have been impressive if it weren't so toxic. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching grandparents' rights in our state. What I found was reassuring. Courts heavily favored parents' decisions unless there was evidence of danger to the child or a pre-existing significant relationship that was being arbitrarily severed. Neither applied here. The next morning, I called a family law attorney recommended by one of my coworkers and scheduled a consultation. The retainer fee would eat into my savings, but peace of mind seemed worth it. "Mom?" Ethan asked at breakfast, pushing his cereal around in the bowl. Jacob at camp said his grandma is taking him to Six Flags for his birthday. How come Grandma never takes me fun places? The innocent question caught me off guard. Well, everyone's grandma is different, I said carefully. Some are more playful than others. He seemed to consider this. Is Grandma still mad at us? I hesitated, searching for the right balance between truth and burden. She's having a hard time understanding why we needed space. She wants things her way, and she's upset that I'm asking for something different. Like when I wanted to quit soccer, but you said I had to finish the season because I made a commitment to my team. I smiled at his attempt to find parallels. Sort of. Except you understood why finishing the season mattered, even if you didn't like it. Grandma doesn't want to understand my reasons. Will she ever? The hope in his voice made my heart ache. I don't know, buddy. Sometimes people can surprise us, but it's not something we can control. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and finally took a bite of his cereal. Mrs. Wilson said she'll take me to the butterfly garden on Saturday. That's a fun place, and she's kind of like a grandma. She is, isn't she? I said, touched by his resilience, his ability to find connection where it was offered, rather than fixating on where it was withheld. The consultation with the attorney, Ms. Reeves, went better than expected. After reviewing my mother's letter and hearing a brief summary of our history, she smiled reassuringly. This is largely an intimidation tactic, she explained. Based on what you've told me, your mother has no grounds for a grandparent visitation case. You're not denying access out of spite. You've established a reasonable boundary based on her behavior. So she can't actually sue and win? I asked, still anxious. She can file a petition, but it's highly unlikely to succeed. Courts are extremely reluctant to override fit parents' decisions. The burden of proof would be on her to show that you're causing harm to your son by withholding contact, which clearly isn't the case. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. And the trust thing? She's free to leave her assets however she chooses, but she can't establish a trust for your son without either your cooperation or a court finding you unfit. Again, extremely unlikely based on the facts. Ms. Reeves helped me draft a formal response to my mother's attorney, calmly but firmly outlining the legal reality of the situation and making it clear that any petition for visitation would be vigorously opposed. Most of these threats fade away once the other party realizes you won't be bullied, she assured me. But if she does file, we'll handle it. The knowledge that my mother's threats held little legal weight gave me back a sense of power I'd been missing. This was another attempt to make me doubt myself, to question my own judgment, to fall back in line with her demands. But this time, I had facts on my side. When I picked Ethan up from camp that afternoon, he was bubbling with excitement about the tadpoles they'd found in the creek. As he chattered about their tiny developing legs and how they'd keep them in a special tank to watch them turn into frogs, I found myself fully present in a way I hadn't always been able to be when constantly preoccupied with my mother's approval. "Can we get ice cream?" he asked suddenly, interrupting his own tadpole monologue. It was a Tuesday. My mother would have said it was indulgent, creating bad habits, that treats should be reserved for weekends or special occasions. "Absolutely," I said, and the smile that lit up his face was worth every imaginary criticism. At the ice cream shop, as Ethan deliberated between cookie dough and mint chocolate chip with the seriousness of someone choosing a college major, my phone rang. My mother's attorney. "I should take this," I told Ethan. "You decide for both of us, okay?" Surprise me. I stepped outside to answer, my heart rate accelerating despite my legal confidence. "Hello? Ms. Parker, this is Gregory Whitman. I've received your response regarding your mother's intentions." "Yes?" I said, when he didn't immediately continue. "I wanted to inform you personally that I've advised Mrs. Parker that her case for grandparent visitation lacks merit. and that pursuing it would likely be costly and unsuccessful. I blinked in surprise. I appreciate your candor. I believe in being straightforward with clients, even when they don't like what I have to say. Mrs. Parker was displeased with my assessment, but I stand by it. I see. I wasn't sure what else to say. Was he actually warning me that my mother might find a more aggressive attorney? She has, of course, terminated my services, he continued, confirming my suspicion. But I thought you should know that she may seek counsel elsewhere. Thank you for letting me know, I said, genuinely touched by his professional courtesy. Ms. Parker, he said, his voice softening slightly. Off the record, this sort of family conflict rarely benefits from legal intervention. I hope you and your mother can find a path to reconciliation that doesn't involve the courts. After we disconnected, I stood outside the ice cream shop for a moment, processing the conversation. It was oddly validating to have my mother's own attorney essentially side with me, even if only on legal grounds. Through the window, I could see Ethan at our table, carefully arranging napkins and spoons, proudly guarding 2 enormous ice cream sundaes. He caught my eye and waved enthusiastically, pointing at the mountain of whipped cream and sprinkles awaiting me. As I rejoined him, accepting the ridiculously large dessert he'd selected, I realized something important. The path forward with my mother, whether toward reconciliation or permanent distance, wasn't about winning or losing. It was about creating a life where Ethan and I could both thrive, where boundaries were respected, where love didn't come with conditions. I got you extra cherries, Ethan announced proudly, because cherries are the best part. They absolutely are, I agreed, popping one into my mouth. Thank you for knowing exactly what I like. He beamed at the acknowledgement, and in that moment, I knew with complete certainty that breaking the cycle of conditional love was worth every difficult conversation, every legal threat, every painful moment of growth. My son deserved to know that love could be steady and secure, and so did I. August arrived with a heat wave that left the entire neighborhood sluggish and irritable. Our window air conditioners struggled to keep pace, occasionally groaning in protest before surrendering to brief, alarming silences. On the 3rd day of temperatures over 100 degrees, our home became unbearable. Beach day? I suggested to Ethan over breakfast, both of us already sticky despite the early hour. Yes, he shouted, immediately animated. Can we invite Mrs. Wilson? To my surprise, Mrs. Wilson accepted enthusiastically. Oh, I haven't been to the shore in years. My Arthur and I used to go every summer before his heart gave out. The drive to the coast took just over an hour, during which Mrs. Wilson regaled us with stories of beach trips from her youth in the 1950s. Ethan listened raptly from the back seat, asking questions about the bathing suits. They looked like little dresses, and the prices. A hot dog and soda for $0.25. We found a spot near the water, but not too far from the boardwalk. Mrs. Wilson supervised our belongings while Ethan and I set up the umbrella and chairs. Perfect, she declared once we'd finished. Now go on, you two. The water's calling. We spent the next hour jumping waves, building drip castles, and hunting for shells. When we returned to our spot, Mrs. Wilson had laid out a feast: homemade fried chicken, potato salad, watermelon, and chocolate chip cookies still slightly warm. Mrs. Wilson, this is amazing, I said, touched. You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble. She waved away my gratitude. Cooking for people is how I show love. Haven't had enough people to cook for these past few years. The simple honesty of her statement struck me deeply. Here was someone who understood that love was expressed through actions, through showing up, through consistency. After lunch, Ethan convinced Mrs. Wilson to walk to the water's edge with us. She rolled up her pants and cautiously waded into her ankles, squealing like a young girl when a wave splashed higher than expected. Oh my, she laughed, clutching Ethan's shoulder for balance. It's colder than I remembered. We spent a few more minutes at the water's edge before returning to our shaded spot, where Mrs. Wilson dozed peacefully while Ethan and I built an elaborate sandcastle. It was the most perfect day I could remember in a long time. Simple, joyful, uncomplicated by expectations or emotional landmines. On the drive home, with Ethan asleep in the back seat and Mrs. Wilson humming softly beside me, I felt profound gratitude. This was family, not defined by blood or obligation, but by choice and care. "Jessica," Mrs. Wilson said quietly, "I want you to know how much these past months have meant to me. Since Arthur passed, the days have been rather empty. You and Ethan have brought light back into my life." I swallowed the sudden tightness in my throat. "We feel the same way about you. You're doing a wonderful job with him, you know. He's kind, thoughtful, curious, all the things that matter." "Thank you," I managed. "That means a lot." "I know things have been difficult with your mother," she continued carefully. "I hope you don't mind my saying this, but family isn't always who we're born to. Sometimes it's who we choose along the way." I blinked back tears. "That's exactly how I've been feeling." "Good," she nodded firmly, "because that boy of yours needs people who see him fully and love him unconditionally." When we reached home, the answering machine was blinking. I helped Mrs. Wilson gather her belongings, carried Ethan to bed, and finally pressed the playback button. "Jessica, this is your mother." Her voice filled the kitchen, making me flinch. "I've been doing some thinking, and perhaps we should talk. In person. Call me back." I stood there uncertain how to feel. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of harm, but there was none of the usual demand or entitlement either. "Perhaps we should talk" was as close to humility as my mother had ever come. I didn't call back that night, or the next. I needed time to process, to decide what I wanted from any potential reconciliation. 3 days later, I finally picked up the phone. "It's Jessica," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yes, I know," she replied, then added, "Thank you for calling back." An awkward silence stretched between us. In the past, I would have rushed to fill it, to ease any discomfort she might feel. This time, I waited. "I received a letter from my former attorney," she said finally. "He suggested I read some books about healthy family dynamics and something called enmeshment, before pursuing any legal action." I almost laughed in surprise. "That was thoughtful of him. I was angry at first," she admitted. "But I did order one of the books, and I've been reading it. And?" she sighed. "And it's uncomfortable, but perhaps not entirely inaccurate. Coming from my mother, this was the equivalent of a dramatic confession. I'm glad you found it helpful." "Jessica," she began again, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "What you said about conditional love, about making you feel like you had to earn the right to be my daughter, was that really how you felt?" "Yes," I said simply, "for as long as I can remember." "I see." Her voice was very small. "Mom, I didn't set this boundary to hurt you. I did it because I needed to break a cycle that was harming both me and Ethan. I needed to show him, and myself, that love shouldn't be used as a weapon or a reward." "The book called it emotional cutoff," she said, testing the term. "When parents withdraw love or approval to control their children's behavior." "That sounds right." I don't think I realized I was doing that. It wasn't conscious. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more self-awareness than she'd ever shown. "I believe you," I said, and I did. My mother wasn't malicious. She was wounded, replicating patterns from her own childhood without examining them. "Would you consider having coffee with me? Just you, not Ethan. To talk about all this?" I considered her request. It was reasonable. focused on rebuilding our relationship rather than demanding access to Ethan. Yes, I decided. But Mom, this isn't going to be fixed in one conversation. There's a lot of hurt on both sides, and rebuilding trust takes time. I understand, she said, though I wasn't entirely convinced she did. Still, it was a start. We arranged to meet at a neutral coffee shop that Saturday. I resolved to maintain my boundaries regardless of her reaction. My mother was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. She'd ordered my usual, an oat milk latte, which surprised me. "Jessica," she said, rising slightly. "Thank you for coming." "Hi, Mom." I sat across from her. "Thanks for the coffee. I've been thinking about what you said, about conditional love." I waited, giving her space to continue. "My parents were strict," she said, staring into her coffee. "Nothing was ever good enough. Emotions were considered weaknesses." "I understand that," I said carefully. "But Mom, when you sent that text telling me you wished I'd never existed, that wasn't structure or high expectations. That was cruelty." She flinched. "I was angry about your post about your father. It felt like you were choosing him over me. That's part of the problem, Mom. You see relationships as competitions. Love isn't a zero-sum game where caring for one person means caring less for another." She looked startled by this observation. "I never thought of it like that. When I posted about Dad, you felt betrayed. When I set a boundary with you, you immediately tried to establish legal access to Ethan as if to say, 'If I can't have you, I'll take him instead.'" She was silent for a long moment. "I never thought of it like that," she repeated. I didn't want to lose my grandson too." "He was never yours to lose, Mom. He's his own person, not a possession. And I wasn't keeping him from you out of spite. I was protecting him from witnessing the same dynamics that hurt me growing up." "Am I really that terrible?" she asked, vulnerability in her voice. "Am I such a monster that my own grandson needs protection from me?" "You're not a monster," I said gently. "But yes, some of your behaviors are harmful. I grew up never feeling secure in your love, because it could be revoked at any moment if I disappointed you. I don't want Ethan to feel that same insecurity." Tears welled in her eyes, a sight so rare I couldn't remember the last time I'd witnessed it. "I don't want that either," she whispered. "What happens now?" she asked after a silence. "Now we try to build something new, something healthier. But it will take time, Mom, and work. Real change, not just temporary adjustments to get what you want." "And Ethan?" The hope in her voice was palpable. "Eventually, yes, but not right away. I need to see consistent change first." She nodded slowly. "The book suggested therapy might help. For me, I mean." I couldn't hide my surprise. "I think that's a really good idea." "Would you help me find someone?" she asked. "You seem to know more about these things than I do." It was such a simple request, yet so profound. My mother acknowledging my knowledge, asking for my help rather than demanding it. "Yes," I said. "I'd be happy to help with that." When we finally parted ways, my mother hugged me. Not the stiff, obligatory embrace of recent holidays, but something softer, more genuine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Jessica." They were just words, and words alone couldn't heal what had been broken between us. But they were a beginning. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months, not because everything was fixed. It wasn't, and might never be completely, but because I'd stood in my truth, maintained my boundaries, and still opened myself to the possibility of reconciliation. When I walked through the door, Ethan looked up from where he and Mrs. Wilson were playing Scrabble. "How was coffee with Grandma?" he asked cautiously. "It was good," I said, surprised to find I meant it. Really good, actually. Did she say sorry for the mean text? He asked, ever focused on the heart of the matter. She did, buddy, and she's working on understanding why it was hurtful. Mrs. Wilson says everyone deserves a second chance if they're really sorry. Mrs. Wilson is very wise, I said, smiling at our neighbor, who winked back. Does this mean we can see Grandma again? Ethan asked. Not right away, I said honestly. Grandma and I are still working through some grown-up things, but maybe soon, if things continue to improve. Okay. He accepted this without distress. Can we go back to the beach next weekend? Mrs. Wilson wants to collect shells for her garden. Just like that, he moved on, secure in the knowledge that his world was stable regardless of when or if his grandmother re-entered it. And that was perhaps the greatest success of all. That in setting my own boundaries, I had created a space where Ethan could trust that love didn't disappear in conflict, that relationships could heal, but never at the cost of his security. As I joined them at the table, accepting the Scrabble tiles Mrs. Wilson dealt me, I realized something profound. The gift my mother had never been able to give me, unconditional love and acceptance, was exactly what I was now able to give my son. The cycle was broken. Sometimes the cruelest words can be the catalyst for the most necessary changes. My mother's text, "Let's pretend you never existed," had forced me to finally claim my existence, to assert my worth, to demand the respect I'd always deserved but never required. I would never forget those words, or the pain they caused. But I would be forever grateful for the strength they helped me find, the strength to protect my son, to build chosen family with people like Mrs. Wilson, and perhaps someday, to forge a new and healthier relationship with the mother who had once wished to erase me. As Ethan placed his tiles on the board, spelling out home with childish pride, I knew with absolute certainty that we had found ours.